Hello and welcome to the second part of responding to Masked Arab. Today we will be responding to the video entitled Quran and the Alexander Romance. His video actually had more to do with proving that Zulkarnain was Alexander the Great rather than targeting Islam. However, he did touch a few things where he did target Islam. We'll touch on those things later. Now, before we move on to Alexander Romance and his video, it's important to first talk about Zulkarnain's account in light of the Quran. The description of Zulkarnain in Quran is frustratingly not much, so we can understand why scholars have always been hesitant to associate Zulkarnain with Alexander or somebody else with certainty. The main points of his description mentioned in the Quran are: number 1, he was a believer in Allah and a Muslim. Number 2, he is identified with good acts, so he was a pious person. Number 3, he had a lot of power. Number 4, he was entitled Dhulkarnain, or the two-horned one. Now, there have been many interpretations of why he was called the two-horned one. Some suggest that it was because he used to wear two horns. Others suggest that the two horns represent the two sides of the world, symbolic of his great kingdom. Anyways, the fifth and the last main point is that he built a great barrier to prevent Yajuj and Majuj, or Gog and Magog, from spreading mischief in the land. So let's move on to the big question. Who is Zulkarnain associated with? Firstly, the masked Arab was right in saying that Muslim scholars are hesitant to accept with certainty Zulkarnain's association with anyone. However, there have been two such figures in history that may have a strong association with Zulkarnain. One is, of course, Alexander the Great, and the other is Cyrus the Great. Now, the reason why Muslim scholars have found it hard to associate Zulkarnain with either one of them is because both of them have positive as well as negative association with Zulkarnain. I'll try to tabulate these, and I will also try to mention how the negative points may be reconciled. First, let's take a look at Alexander's association with Zulkarnain. The similarities are: number 1, both of them are entitled the two-horned. Number 2, both are identified with having great power. Number 3, the story in Alexander Romance about Gog and Magog is very similar to the story of Zulkarnain. Now let's move on to differences. Number 1, the biggest difference is perhaps when it comes to the beliefs of Alexander the Great. History suggests that his religion was that of ancient Greeks, which was polytheism. The second negative point is that he has been identified with many bad and cruel acts. And the last difference is that he is not mentioned in the Bible. So maybe the Jewish rabbis knew about somebody else as Zulkarnain. So how to reconcile? Well, the only way to reconcile the first point is to say that either the historical narrative on Alexander's religion is altogether wrong, which is highly unlikely, or it may be that he was a polytheist in greater part of his life and may have converted to the right faith of monotheism in the later part of his life. History may have only recorded the former and not the later. Now, on the issue of his bad behavior, it may be that many of his actions may have had a good reason behind them. History doesn't tell us about all the circumstances and the context behind each and every event. And also, when you have such a great kingdom, you are bound to get involved with controversies. Now, on the last point of he not being mentioned in the Bible, we can say that maybe the Jewish rabbis knew about him by stories from the past. Now, let's move on to Cyrus the Great's association with Zulkarnain. The similarities are: number 1, both of them believed in God. Number 2, both entitled the two horned. Number 3, both identified with having great power. Number 4, both identified with good acts. And number 5, Cyrus is also mentioned in the Old Testament. Now, on the differences, the only difference is that the writings of Alexander Romans specifically mentions Alexander with the story of Gog and Magog, and not Cyrus. And this is also tied in with the massed Arabs' belief of Zulkarnain as Alexander, and not Cyrus. So, how to reconcile this difference? Well, the writings of Alexander Romans are attributed to Pseudo-Callisthenes, who is an anonymous writer. History suggests that this record is extremely inaccurate. Even masked Arab acknowledged this in his video. So we can say that Pseudo-Callisthenes may have easily mixed Cyrus with Alexander in his writings associated with the Gog and Magog story. Now, the reason for mentioning all this is just to show that Zulkarnain's association with someone other than Alexander is not impossible, as alluded by masked Arab. And as a Muslim, whatever perspective you take on Zulkarnain, whether his association with Alexander, Cyrus, or somebody else, as far as our faith is concerned, it doesn't make any difference. And yes, on issues where there is doubt involved, we do have interpretations, but in the end, it's better to say Allahu Alam, or Allah knows best. Finally, let's address some of masked Arab's allegations. He said that Quran just copied the Zulkarnain story from the previous historical record. Well, if there is something in history that was true and also important for us to know, and Allah mentions it in Quran, then there shouldn't be any problem. And as far as Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, copying stuff is concerned, we should know that Allah sent messengers with the same basic message. Now, if that message is repeated or reassured by new prophets, and you want to call it copying or plagiarism, then fine, believe whatever you want to believe. But the reason we believe that Prophet didn't copy it but was actually revealed to him by Wahi is because of the miraculous nature of Quran and also the truthful nature of Prophet. Another thing he mentioned was about proskinesis. He said that Prayers are nothing new in Islam. Well, yes, we Muslims do believe that prayers are nothing new in Islam brought by Prophet Muhammad. In fact, prayers were established way before Islam, and also prayers with prostration are mentioned in the Bible in several occasions. Another thing I would like to mention here is that before there used to be what is known as the ta'zimi sajda, or the prostration done in respect to kings or rulers. But this type of prostration was abrogated later on. Lastly, he mentioned that how can Muslims be unsure of who is Zulkarnain when the Jewish rabbis asking Prophet about Zulkarnain would imply that they must know who he was. Yes, that's actually a good point. To answer this question, we should know that Zulkarnain could possibly be not his name. It could be just his title. Although the Jewish rabbis could have known who was being referred while talking about Zulkarnain, just like we know who we are talking about when we refer to Fir'aun or Pharaoh. We immediately know that we are talking about the Pharaoh during the time of Moses, although there were many pharaohs. And also, Pharaoh was just his title and not his original name. It's only during recent times that we associate the Pharaoh of Moses with Ramses II. So the point is that the problem comes with how history is unfolded. Similarly, with Zulkarnain, although the rabbis may have distinctly known about the person associated with Zulkarnain, but as the history unfolds, many things start to mix and interlink. That's why Muslims became hesitant of associating Zulkarnain with any distinct person.